They invited everyone. Uncles, aunts, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. My mom even hired a photographer. I thought it was for me. I thought this day, finally, was mine. But when I walked into the living room, the banner didn't say, "Congratulations, Emily!" It said, "Way to go, Brandon." My brother had gotten a promotion, and they hijacked my graduation to celebrate him. I smiled for the photos, pretended I didn't care. But deep down, I made a promise. This would be the last time they ignored me. And next time, I wouldn't need an invitation. My parents' living room always smelled like old books and coffee. Two things I loved. But there was one thing in that room that made my stomach twist every time I walked in. The massive portrait of Brandon. Hung right above the fireplace, it captured my brother at age 25 in a perfectly pressed suit, arms crossed, framed in gold. There was a spotlight installed just for it. It clicked on automatically at 6 p.m. Like clockwork, like worship. I was never jealous of Brandon, at least not at first. I was proud of him. He worked hard, climbed fast, earned well. But over the years, pride turned into something sour. Because no matter what I did, honor roll, student research grant, even the psychology department's award for outstanding contribution, my parents responded with the same script. "That's great, honey, but don't brag, okay?" It was never said with cruelty, just with absence. A smile that didn't reach their eyes. A pat on the back that never turned into a hug. The day the email came, I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a stale bagel. I almost deleted it, thinking it was some student spam. But the subject line stopped me cold. Commencement speaker confirmation. Emily Reese. I was chosen to speak. Me, out of hundreds. I felt the breath leave my chest. I stared at the screen for a full minute before rereading it. Then again. And again. My finger hovered over the forward button. Should I tell Mom? Dad? But just as quickly I clicked it away. I didn't forward it. Didn't mention it. I knew how that would go. That night, during dinner, I worked up the nerve. "Hey, my school asked me to give a speech at graduation." Silence. Dad didn't even look up from his phone. Mom was stirring her tea. "That's nice, sweetie. Will Brandon be able to come?" Brandon. Always Brandon. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. That was Monday. On Wednesday, Brandon was on the news. CNBC, 8 p.m. They were doing a segment on young executives, and he was front and center, talking about scaling companies and venture rounds. The moment his face filled the screen, my dad leapt off the couch like a kid on Christmas morning. "There's our boy," he shouted. "Turn it up." My mom grabbed her phone and started recording the TV screen like she'd never seen it before. I stood in the doorway, the email still open on my phone, glowing quietly in my hand. After a minute, I clicked it off. The room was full of sound, of laughter, of applause. But none of it was for me. That night, I lay in bed replaying the CNBC clip in my head, line by line. Then I replayed my own words. "They asked me to give a speech," the quiet that followed. I thought maybe I'd imagined the hurt, that maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. I was invisible, unless I was useful. 3 days later, I heard my mom on the phone. Yep, big cake, chocolate with gold lettering. Yeah, just right. Congratulations, Brandon. It's for the 12th. I froze. My graduation was on the 12th. She walked past me in the hallway and smiled. "Oh, Em, can you help me pick up some napkins for the party?" "What's the party for?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Don't be silly. For Brandon's promotion. Isn't it exciting?" That night, I posted a picture of my cap and gown on Instagram, with a simple caption, "Grateful." I watched the views trickle in, friends, professors, even old classmates. But no likes from my family. Not one. On the morning of the 12th, I got dressed in silence. I slipped on the same dress I wore for my scholarship dinner last year. My mom had forgotten that one too. At the door of the party hall, I paused. I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, someone giving a toast. When I stepped inside, no one turned. The room was full, warm, buzzing with energy. Gold balloons, a huge banner. "Way to go, Brandon," in glittery font. I walked slowly, scanning the tables. Strangers smiled at me politely. One man, middle-aged and balding, tapped my shoulder and said with a grin, "You must be Brandon's girlfriend. Lucky guy." I forced a smile. "No," I said. "I'm his sister." He blinked. "Oh, huh. I didn't know he had a sister." I nodded. "Most people don't." I was reaching for a fork in the kitchen drawer when I saw it. A stack of printed documents under a pile of catering receipts. I don't know what made me pull them out. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe part of me already knew what I'd find. The title on the first page stopped me cold. Private Investment Mixer, hosted by Brandon Reese. Below that, in bold, Strategic Partner Event to introduce high-profile investors to Reese Tech founder. Not a single mention of me. Not graduation. Not Emily. Not even family event. I flipped through the pages. Catering schedule, seating arrangements, talking points for Brandon's introduction. Under guest priorities, someone had scribbled, "Ensure strong branding image. Family presence should be kept polished. Avoid distractions." Avoid distractions. Was that what I was now? I kept reading. Tucked near the bottom was an email printout. The font was small, the language formal. But I recognized the signature. My dad's. "Let's make sure Brandon's image stays sharp. No messy emotional stuff. Keep Emily in the background if needed. We want this clean." I didn't cry. Not then. I sat down at the table and stared at the ceiling, letting the words ring in my ears like a bell. Keep Emily in the background. I could have stormed into the living room, thrown the papers down, shouted until they saw me. But something in me snapped differently this time. Not rage, not despair. Just clarity. I began collecting. I went back to the documents and photographed each page. Later that night, I opened the family laptop. My mom's, the one she used to email guests and vendors, and pulled the event folder onto a flash drive. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I needed it. The next morning, while dropping off extra napkins at the venue, I overheard a staff member confirming RSVPs. "Yeah, he's coming. Big deal, apparently. Head of Horizon Educational Trust. Major player in the non-profit space." That name stopped me in my tracks. Horizon was one of the largest educational foundations in the country. They supported progressive curriculum, mental health initiatives, and funded hundreds of university programs nationwide, including mine. I walked outside, heart racing, and called my advisor. "Professor Linton," I said, "you remember that paper I submitted on parental favoritism and adolescent development?" "Of course," he said. "It was brilliant. Why?" "I need you to help me print 50 copies, professionally bound. I'll cover the cost." There was a pause. "Emily, what are you planning?" I didn't answer directly. "I'm just going to stop being invisible." By Friday afternoon, the booklets were ready. Simple black covers, silver embossed title, The Overlooked Mind, a case study on familial neglect. I placed one on every table at the venue, right next to the wine glasses and tiny vases of white orchids. My name wasn't on the cover, but the author bio on the back was clear enough. Emily Reese, B.A. Psychology, class of 2025. Guests began arriving at 7. I wore a navy dress and kept my hair tied back. Clean, professional, unapologetic. I made small talk with the professors I'd invited. None of them knew the full story. Just that I'd asked them to attend a family event, where their presence might mean something. By 8, the room was full. Laughter buzzed in the air. Waiters passed hors d'oeuvres. Brandon was making rounds, shaking hands with men in suits, posing for pictures with women in heels twice their height. And then, the murmurs started. At one of the tables near the back, a guest picked up the booklet and started flipping through it. Another followed, and another. I watched from the corner as one man, silver-haired, crisp navy suit, paused at the author page, then turned slowly toward my father. "This is fantastic," he said, holding the booklet up. "Your daughter wrote this." My father chuckled, a bit too loud. "Oh, that? Just something she dabbles in. She's a writer. You know how kids are." I walked toward them. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor. I smiled at the man. "Actually, I'm the author. It's a case study based on real patterns of emotional invalidation within family systems. I submitted it as my capstone project." The man looked genuinely intrigued. "You have real talent, Miss Reese. Have you considered applying for the Horizon Scholars Initiative?" I nodded. "Already did. Got accepted." My mother appeared beside my father, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Emily," she said through clenched teeth, "can I talk to you for a second?" But I was already walking to the front of the room. I picked up the microphone from the DJ stand, turned it on, and let the feedback hum settle. "Good evening," I said. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate, well, something." A few chuckles, a few confused looks. My father froze. Brandon stared. "I just wanted to take a moment to thank the people who supported me during my years of study. My professors, my peers, and those of you who understand that success isn't always loud or visible." I paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "For those wondering, I graduated with honors this week, and I was the student commencement speaker at my university. I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but then I realized silence has never protected me." I set the mic down. The applause faded quicker than I expected. A few people smiled at me, nodded politely. One of my professors gave me a discreet thumbs up, but most eyes drifted away, back toward Brandon, who had just returned to the room, wineglass in hand. I stood there for a moment, microphone still slightly warm in my hand. And then I saw it. My parents walking straight toward me. For a second, half a second, I thought they were coming to hug me, to say something, anything. But they didn't. They passed right by me, brushed past my shoulder, and went straight to Brandon. Mom adjusted his collar. Dad leaned in and whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. I stood still, invisible in a room I had just lit on fire. No one followed me when I walked out. The night air was thick with summer heat, but my skin felt cold. I got into my car, but I didn't drive. I just sat there. Hands on the steering wheel, eyes forward, waiting for the tears. They never came. Instead, my mind began playing memories like a cruel slideshow. Me at age 8, holding up a crayon drawing of our family, only to hear, "Brandon's science fair project is more impressive." Me at 12, coming home with a trophy for public speaking, only to see my parents celebrating Brandon's junior internship offer. Me at 16, overhearing Mom say to a friend, "Emily's quiet. She's not really leadership material." I drove aimlessly for an hour, then pulled over at the park near the university. I hadn't been there in years. It was almost empty except for a few joggers and an old woman feeding birds from a bench near the fountain. I sat down beside her without a word. We watched the pigeons for a long time. "They remember the hands that feed them," she said softly, tossing crumbs. I looked at her. "What if no one ever fed you?" She didn't flinch. "Then you feed yourself, and you feed others who never learned how." I didn't respond. She glanced at me, eyes sharp but kind. "You're not invisible, dear. They just never learned to see you right." That night I went home and didn't speak a word to anyone, but I didn't sleep either. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote an email. I attached everything: my speech, my research paper, and a summary of my personal story, framed within the lens of emotional neglect. I sent it to the contact listed on Horizon's website, addressed to the man who had spoken to me at the event. 2 days later, I received a reply. They wanted me to speak at their summer summit. The topic: Unseen Children, the Psychology of Overlooked Success. I said yes. In the same week, I launched my podcast, Quiet Rebellion. Episode 1. The banner wasn't for me. I didn't mention names. I didn't call anyone out. But the truth didn't need names. It carried its own gravity. The episode was shared by a few psychology student forums, then a few professors. Within days, the views multiplied. I started getting messages. From girls in dorm rooms. From mothers. From men who said they hadn't spoken to their siblings in years. They weren't angry messages. They were thankful, grieving, honest. Someone finally said it. They wrote. Someone told our story. Then, a week after the party, my phone rang. "Brandon." I stared at the screen. I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But something inside me, the same thing that refused to let my parents write the ending, made me pick up. His voice cracked on the first word. "Em?" I didn't answer. I got fired." Silence. "There was an audit," he continued. "They found out. Some of the reports I submitted last year, they weren't mine. I copied a draft from an internal doc." He was crying now. "They're suing me. I lost everything." My grip tightened. I imagined the portrait on our living room wall, the golden frame, the smug smile, all of it crumbling. "I don't know who else to call," he whispered. "You're the only one who ever saw me, even when I didn't deserve it." I leaned against the window, the cool glass grounding me. What was I supposed to say? The boy who had been placed on a pedestal while I disappeared had fallen, and somehow I was still expected to catch him. The hospital smelled like bleach and old secrets. I found Brandon in a pale blue gown, slouched on a narrow bed, IV in his arm. He looked smaller than I remembered, less invincible. His eyes flicked up when I walked in, and for a moment he looked almost relieved. I didn't sit. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here to fix you," I said quietly. "I'm here because I needed to look you in the eye and say this." He waited. "I don't hate you, Brandon. I just don't see you anymore." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "I spent most of my life being a shadow to your spotlight. Now that it's gone, I don't see you at all. I see the space you took up, and I'm finally filling it with myself." He didn't respond. I left without saying goodbye. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was clipped, rehearsed. "We need to talk." It wasn't a request. I met them at the house, though everything in me screamed to stay away. The moment I stepped through the door, I was hit with the familiar scent of polished wood and artificial lavender. And silence. They sat me down like I was a guest, like they were negotiating a business deal. "We think it's best if you issue a public clarification," my father began. "All this online attention, it's putting the family under a lot of stress." I stared at him. "Clarification?" "That your podcast doesn't reflect the truth," my mother added. "That it's fiction, artistic expression." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "You want me to lie?" My father's jaw tightened. "It's not about lies, Emily. It's about protecting the family name." I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my bag and placed it on the table. It was a letter, signed by Brandon, a written statement admitting to the plagiarism, the manipulation, the silence, a full confession of what had happened behind closed doors. Their faces shifted from pale to furious in seconds. My mother stood. "You really want to destroy us?" I met her eyes. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped hiding it." Then came the twist I didn't see coming. My father reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside was a letter from a lawyer. "If you continue to speak publicly about this family," he said, voice low and calm, "we'll file a defamation suit." It was laughable, painfully desperate. "You're going to sue your own daughter?" I asked. "We're going to protect our legacy," my mother said. I stood up. "Good. Because I'm building mine too." 2 days later, I uploaded a new episode of Quiet Rebellion. I titled it Episode 4, The Family Business. In it, I played a recording, an old one I had almost deleted. In the background, you could hear the clinking of dishes, casual conversation. Then my father's voice. "We didn't plan for a second kid. Emily was a mistake, a soft one. We raised her, but she was never meant to carry the name." My voice on the tape was younger, quieter. "But I did carry it." And my mother, laughing faintly, replied, "Yes, but no one really saw it, did they?" The clip lasted 42 seconds. The reaction online was nuclear. People weren't just angry, they were gutted. Messages poured in, articles were written, influencers reposted the episode with captions like, "Not all wounds bleed." This is why so many of us are in therapy. My parents vanished from the internet. Social media accounts gone. Business page removed. Brandon too disappeared from public view. And I didn't sue them. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its job. Instead, I ended the episode with a different kind of message. "I forgive them," I said. "Not because they deserve it, but because I refuse to carry their silence anymore. My story is mine now, and I'm done whispering." That night, as I scrolled through listener messages, one caught my eye. It was from a girl named Sophia, age 13. Her message read, "My mom says I ruin everything. She told me I wasn't supposed to be born. She says I'm broken. But I heard your voice and maybe I'm not." I stared at the screen for a long time. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe none of us were. It started with 6 people in a library basement, a folding table, chipped mugs of tea, and a chalkboard that still had equations from a math club 2 nights before. I called it the Uncelebrated Club. No speeches, no hierarchy, just stories. One by one, we sat in a circle and shared the ways we'd been forgotten, overlooked, talked over. Some had been middle children, others firstborns who cracked under pressure, or kids who never quite fit their parents' version of success. We laughed, cried, and most importantly, listened. I created an online version the following week. In 3 months, it had nearly 100 members. By 6 months, we had chapters in 3 cities. Meanwhile, Quiet Rebellion passed 10 million downloads. Sponsors began to reach out. I turned them down, every one of them. I didn't want ads for vitamins or skincare interrupting people's pain. Instead, I started funding the podcast with small donations from listeners. $5 here, 10 there. It was enough. At a community event in Portland, I met Maria. She was 53, soft-spoken, and carried herself like someone who had survived a war no one saw. "I used to be you," she said after my panel, but no one was ready to hear it when I spoke up. She had tried decades ago to talk about emotional neglect. Her own family had mocked her. Her husband left. Her children didn't understand. But she kept journals, essays, pieces she never published. She handed me a folder. "I think it's your turn now," she said. "But if you ever get tired, know I've been walking beside you longer than you think." I read her work that night. It was beautiful, raw, wounded. I emailed her the next morning. "Would you consider being my mentor?" She replied within minutes. "I already am." A few weeks later, I returned to my childhood home to pick up old boxes of books I'd left behind. My parents weren't there. Hadn't been for a while. The house was quiet, too clean. I stepped into the living room, unsure what I was expecting. The wall above the fireplace was bare. No portrait. Just blank space and a faint outline where the gold frame used to be. For a moment, I imagined younger me, 10 years old, arms folded, staring up at that portrait, wondering if I'd ever matter enough to earn a frame of my own. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle around me. I didn't feel victorious, just still. A few days later, I stood under the hot lights of a TEDx stage. The room was packed, cameras everywhere. I wore no jewelry, no makeup, just a black blouse and slacks. I wanted people to hear my words, not see a version of me polished for approval. The talk was called "To the Ones Never Toasted." I told the story, not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity. I used to think I needed a seat at the table, that one day someone would raise a glass and say my name. But I've learned that I don't need anyone to toast me. I raise my own glass, every day, in quiet celebration of surviving what I wasn't supposed to. There was silence at first, then thunderous applause. That night the clip went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was familiar. In every comment someone wrote, "This was my story too." A week later I received an email. It was from my mother's address. No greeting, no sign-off, just one line. "If you're reading this, know I'm trying to relearn how to love." I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and stared out the window for a long time. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things need time. Some wounds need air. But for the first time, her words didn't come as a demand or a mask. They sounded like something else. Like a beginning. The invitation had gone out months ago, printed on heavy cardstock with gold foil letters and soft cream edges. It wasn't flashy, but it carried weight. This was the first annual Overlooked Award, hosted by the Uncelebrated Club, honoring individuals who had risen in silence, who had survived families that never clapped, never asked, never stayed. We had invited donors, educators, survivors, and yes, parents, not because they were heroes, but because some of them had begun the hard work of listening. I never expected mine to show up. I hadn't spoken to them in over a year. The auditorium held about 400 people. I stood backstage, smoothing down my blazer, checking the mic pinned to my collar. My mentor, Maria, gave me a small nod. "You don't need to prove anything anymore," she said. "I know," I whispered, "but I want to show them it can be done." I peeked through the curtain. Third row from the back near the aisle sat my parents. They were smaller than I remembered. My mother's hands were folded tight in her lap. My father stared straight ahead. No one seemed to notice them. No introductions, no spotlight, just two people sitting in the dark. I didn't look away immediately. My gaze held them for a breath, maybe two. Then I turned and faced the stage. The lights were bright, the applause warm. I stepped up to the podium. "Welcome," I began. "Tonight is not about applause. It's about acknowledgement. There's a difference. I spoke of the kids who learned to comfort themselves, the students who celebrated alone in dorm rooms, the artists whose work never made it to the fridge door. We're here because we kept going, not because someone cheered us on, but because we chose to." When the first award was presented, to a former foster youth who had become a therapist, the crowd stood. I watched her cry into her hands as she accepted the glass plaque. She didn't thank anyone. She just said, "I didn't think I mattered. Now I do." The ceremony ended quietly. There was no confetti, no streamers, just hugs, tears, and a line of people waiting to say thank you to each other. I never approached my parents. They never approached me. But as I walked off the stage and crossed the aisle toward the back, I glanced their way again. My father's eyes were red. My mother was holding her own hand so tightly, I thought her knuckles might split. I nodded once. Not forgiveness, not invitation, just recognition. And then I walked out into the night. Months passed. Seasons shifted. My podcast continued. The community expanded. We began partnering with schools, training educators to spot emotional neglect, to see the silent ones at the back of the room. I was 30 when the publishing house reached out. They'd heard about the movement, read my old research, followed the podcast. "We want the story," they said. "Not just yours, but theirs too." I said yes. The book took nearly 2 years. It wasn't a memoir, though I was in every page. It was a blueprint, a collection of stories, a dissection of pain and survival and rebirth. I called it The Celebration That Was Never Hers. It was never meant to be a bestseller, but it was. Book clubs adopted it. Counselors assigned it. Professors quoted it. Parents whispered about it behind closed doors. I was invited to conferences, but I always declined. I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted to be useful. Then, one spring morning, I received an email with the subject line, "Voice of a Generation." It was from a nonprofit alliance, honoring those who'd sparked national conversations around youth mental health. At the ceremony, I wore a simple blue dress. I stood at the podium and accepted the award not with a speech, but with silence. Just a bow. Because some victories don't need words. Later that year, I visited a classroom in a small town for a literacy outreach event. The students were quiet at first, flipping through copies of my book with wide eyes. Then a girl, maybe 9, maybe 10, raised her hand. "Did you really not get a party when you graduated?" she asked. I smiled. "That's right." She frowned. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "It's not." She paused, hugging the book to her chest. "But you still wrote this?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied. "Then I'm gonna write something too. For my little brother. So he knows I see him." Something in me cracked open. Before I left, I heard her whisper to a friend. She was like me. Not famous, not loud, not celebrated. Just seen. I walked out of the school and stood in the sunshine for a while. No cameras, no reporters. Just the sound of wind in the trees. And the quiet certainty that my story, once ignored, was now echoing in someone else's voice. And that was enough.